Freedom. Freedom. Freedom over fame. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
Hey, welcome back there, my band baddies.
Okay.
How dare you?
I like it.
I gotta start again.
This is the first time I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it with you guys for the first time.
Coming back around twice again. Welcome back, my band baddies, or just welcome back to the Band Together podcast. Thanks for joining us for another enlightened episode. My name's Gina Macrina, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my co-host and my girlfriend, Adriana, the most beautiful woman in the world. Today, we are diving into the pages of the truly impactful All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson.
Thanks for that thorough introduction, Gina. As she said, today we're covering All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. All Boys Aren't Blue is a memoir that paints a vivid picture of George M. Johnson's experience growing up as a Black queer individual in the United States. And this book is amazing. Truly
It's my
breaking barriers. It shatters them.
It's one of my favorite books, I think, now.
I'm so thrilled that we got to read this book for this week. And I think it is so perfect for the times that we live in. It opened up a lot of conversation for us.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of an amazing book. But the whole time I was reading it, there were so many aha moments. Especially for me as like a white woman, a white lesbian woman. And the fact that it's the number 2 banned book
In the U.S.
in
right
the
now.
U.S.
It's
right
banned
now.
in 29 different school districts.
And they're truly taking a prize away from the children, as far as I'm concerned. It's
From the children.
From the children.
So I will say, George M. Johnson, they acknowledge that this book has some sexually explicit content. So trigger warning for anyone who hasn't read the book. This does cover sexual assault. It covers his first experience with sex.
There's violence in this book.
There's violence in the book. So they acknowledge, George M. Johnson has come out and said that they go by they, them pronouns. So they acknowledge that this book is more fitted for 14 and up. So it's not like we're saying that this book is for third graders. It's definitely not, but it's definitely a really compelling read. If you get the Audible book or just the audio version of this book, they narrate themselves. So it's super cool to listen to them kind of talk about their life experience. We go from everything from pivotal moments in childhood, identifying their sexuality. They touch on family, love, sexuality, race, self-expression, and everything in between.
Yeah, they gave us the most intimate description of their life in such an honest light that I don't think most people even allot themselves to look on their own life.
Right.
And just going page by page, and they narrate the audiobook themselves. It hits it home. So if anybody is in the habit of utilizing audiobooks, I completely encourage that. By the way, shout out to all my dyslexic buddies out there. We got a lot of really positive feedback from the dyslexia topic last episode. So if you're joining us and you're dyslexic, get tested.
You are seen here.
You are seen. You're in the right place, and get tested.
Super ominous. So this book was released in 2020, which, if all of us remember, let's go back to 2020.
Dun, dun, dun.
And just a crazy time. Pandemic, George Floyd, protests in the streets.
I was out there.
Isolation.
I was in the middle of Los Angeles protesting for George Floyd, and that was an intense time.
Yeah. And this book, we couldn't have read it at a better time. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, August 16th, and we're just a few days after the tragic death of O'Shae Sibley, who was a dancer who was stabbed to death at a gas station for simply existing, for being a Black man who was enjoying a Beyonce song. So
He was voguing.
he was voguing. Yeah. We were in the midst of reading this book already, or if not, we were just about to start reading it when we heard the news. And it's 3 years later and things aren't really changing. But
Right.
I don't know about you. I feel like I know this isn't tangible. And also, we're going through the Hawaii thing right now, the Hawaii wildfires. I'm sure everyone is aware, but the island of Maui is really in crisis. And if you can donate, we're going to link some stuff in the show notes. We're going to try to find responsible ways to donate because from what it sounds like, FEMA, the Red Cross, are not actually getting resources to the people of Maui. But I know it doesn't seem like it sometimes because the world is dark and it feels like the world is against us. But I feel like things are changing. Does that make sense?
Well, as an internal optimist.
And this is why it works, because she is an internal optimist and I am not. So it takes a lot for me to say that things are changing. But I don't know. Maybe it's just my algorithm be algorithming hard.
Mhm.
But I do feel like more and more people are starting to realize that there's more of us. And by us, I mean the global majority.
I really love that term.
Me too.
I think
it's my new favorite way to say things.
I think whoever coined that term, it was genius because it really kind of puts things into a perspective for those of us who are Caucasian, are unfortunately Caucasian. But no, look, everybody goes through growing pains. The world is going through growing pains right now. If you haven't heard about what happened in Maui, there was an extremely bad wildfire. They're still counting the death toll, and they're thinking a lot of those had to do with children. So the sad part of that is you see a lot of accounts on TikTok, and anybody who's trying to talk about the tragedy, they're saying that they're out there, they're trying to get food and resources to the survivors, and at the same time there's snorkeling ships driving right by them. And I'm not.
There are like land developers calling people, asking them to buy their fucking land from them.
Right.
And they haven't even been able to go see the rubble of the remains of their house. Like, honestly, fuck off.
Yeah.
Like fuck the patriarchy. Fuck capitalism. Burn it to the fucking ground.
Like, if the first thought in your head after this fire is monetary gain, then you can go shove a stick up your ass. Just have a little bit of respect. Anybody who knows any Pacific Islanders knows that they're a great people. And even if it's not specifically a Pacific Islander that was affected, these are people's homes, they're people's lives. Be respectful to them. For the love of God, don't go snorkeling past them while they're literally picking up the ashes of their belongings / perhaps their dead children. Because they're saying that because the alarm bells rang so late.
They didn't ring.
Oh, right. They didn't ring at all.
They have the most intricate alarms, like outdoor alarm system. Just because they're an island that gets hit with shit and tsunamis all the time.
Yeah.
They have the most intricate system and they didn't fucking sound the alarms.
Right.
They had closed like the main street to leave that side of the island. Like there were barricades. That's why you see all those cars abandoned.
Yeah.
They had sent the kids home from school, so they were just at home without their parents, and they obviously didn't know to leave.
Right, because school was called off that day.
Yeah, like, I don't know. It's all really fucking weird.
Really weird scenario.
But all of this conspiracy theories aside, my heart goes out to everyone who's suffering. My heart goes out to anyone who's lost a loved one, can't find their loved ones. Like, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. My heart is with you. We will link to anything that we can to help donate.
Yeah, there's a few reputable direct links that I'll put in the description of this episode. Please, please support them. They've literally lost everything, and they are a very beautiful part of our world. So let's just be...
And don't go to Hawaii. Just don't go to Hawaii right now.
I mean...
Just fuck your wedding. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Hawaiians have been calling out for years to please not go to Hawaii. And I have had some close Hawaiian friends, and I know a lot of us don't grow up with the knowledge, but Hawaii is completely run by Caucasians, and the land was stolen from Pacific Islanders, and now they kind of have to Their resources for growth are non-existent.
They're being priced out.
Mm-hmm.
Their land was stolen from them.
They have to perform for tourists in order
Right.
to make money, which
It's
is
just-
exploiting their culture in most cases. And then the drugs are running rampant through there, and it's just not helping their community. But again, I feel like when you don't have a lot of options to move up, there's always options to keep you down,
Yeah.
you know? So, point is, if you don't know a lot about it, start looking into it, donate to reputable places. We support Maui. And I'm so sorry for everything that's happening over there, guys. My heart goes out to you. To kind of get back on track as far as the book goes, like I said, this has become one of my favorite books, I think. And I realized while we were reading the book that George and I are in very similar age groups.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, they were talking about where they were during 9/11, and I realized that we were in the same grade. And I was also taking the bus to school.
Were you? I was not allowed to take the bus to school. I don't know why that excited me.
If you guys were here, you would see that a light flickered in her eyes that I've never seen before while
I
talking about a
wasn't.
bus.
I didn't get to have a lot of like normal childhood experiences.
It's
So.
the Jehovah's Witness thing. All good things there.
Okay, so getting back on track with the book. So as we mentioned, this book does dig into some sexually explicit content. Ironically, some of my favorite parts of the book are where he's talking about that. Not favorite as in like favorite yay, but favorite as in I found the most valuable to me.
I don't think it's ironic at all. I'm also somebody who suffered from sexual abuse at a young age, and they talk about their sexual abuse in detail, and I think it was not crass. I think it was completely informative.
It was, oh my God, it was stunning because I haven't read a book. I haven't listened to a podcast. I haven't listened to any content that has been so black and white about what the experience is like. And having also been a survivor of sexual assault, and really in the last 6 months of my life, like dealing with what that feels like for me, I'm going to tear up.
It's all right. It's all right.
I was so glad that there was a book that spoke to the confusion, because they speak about an experience that they had with their cousin. And although that wasn't exactly who I had my experience with, there was confusion about things feeling good and not feeling good.
Right.
And that's so confusing for a kid. It's so scary. And I think that's why that was my favorite part. That was like a big part of it for me. I was like, oh fuck, like this is super important. And I understand why it's been banned, because the argument always for banned books is sexually explicit content. And of the books that are banned currently in the US, 41% of them explicitly address LGBTQ plus themes or have protagonists or secondary characters that are within the community. So speaking about sexuality is very taboo. And their experience was same sex. And they were confused. They were confused because they didn't know what was happening. Their body was reacting a certain way. They knew it was wrong. So something that George M. Johnson said themselves that I pulled up because it spoke to me. They said, in speaking about why this book was banned, they said, I'm using my story to teach kids about the mistakes that I made the first time that I was having sex. This is about a different passage, not about his sexual assault, but it is also still relevant so that they don't make the same mistakes. I'm teaching kids about not feeling guilty when sexual abuse happens and how to recognize sexual abuse and how to fight back against those traumas. that you can hold on to for so very long. So they're leaving very, very important context out intentionally, of course, to try and say my book is pornographic. Because again, the reason that this book has been banned is because they're quoting sexually explicit content, calling it pornographic. And I get it. I mean, some of the scenes are really explicit, but they're so important because I'm 35 years old and I saw myself in those pages. I'm not a man. I'm not Black. I didn't have this experience, but I felt those same confusing feelings and that same shame and guilt that you feel once it's happened. And in now trying to unweave the trauma that I've been holding on in my body, there's something really empowering about someone writing a book and going like, this happened to me and this is how I feel about it and this is how I'm moving forward from it, and not shying away from the history of their life. Because you can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. You can't know how to heal from something if you don't know that it happened. You can't begin to take the steps if you're ignoring a big piece of you. And for me, a big part of it is that I didn't have a lot of memories. I didn't have any memories from my childhood. And it's been such a big, it's been like unraveling of memories.
It's like an onion.
It's
right?
like an onion. Like I'm peeling away pieces of like trauma and hurt and guilt and shame and anger and the anger that comes with it. And this book was like it really spoke to me. And I get what they're saying, where they're saying, I'm not writing this because I want to put my sexually explicit experiences out there. I want to write it to give kids who are experiencing these things or who are confused about their sexuality or what sex looks like after abuse. They talk about their first consensual experience with sex, and people don't talk about that. And I loved it because as someone who had only dated dudes up until very recently, up until about almost 2 years ago.
That's where I come in, y'all.
I didn't know what sex looked like on the other side. I'm sure there was a book I could have checked out of the library, but how beautiful that this is coming from someone within the community who wants to be a representation for other people who look like them, who walk like them, who talk like them.
Well, let's put it in perspective, right? And thank you so much for kind of expressing that, because so many of us who experience sexual abuse, one, don't have the vocabulary to talk about it correctly. Two, kids, while, during, before, and after their sexual abuse, most likely don't have the vocabulary to talk about it. And that's why books like this, which I think he lands the age at an appropriate one, I think that they pin the age at an appropriate age, which is 14. I think at 14, you're more than capable of wrapping your mind around this experience because it's not explicit. It's not like 50 Shades of Grey. They're talking about an abusive situation, and they're talking about situations that they actively participated in later on in life. And the chapter is even called Losing My Virginity Twice. And I think that's perfectly named.
I think so too.
And
I don't know. There's just like such a soft spot in my heart for this book now.
Yeah, it's up there for me.
It's like it's so wide open and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's something that's so lacking. It speaks to toxic masculinity, to a sense of not knowing your identity.
I think it speaks a lot to a community. They had a lot of family support that not a lot of queer boys and girls get
to have.
And they acknowledge that in the book, which I think is equally important. I even remember when you read chapter 11, which...
I text you.
Yeah. You text me and you were like, it's heavy, Adrian and I we make it a point not to talk about the book before we come on and record. And then after I read chapter 11 and I felt how important it was as well. Well, they come in hot with the first chapter. They talk about getting their teeth kicked in when they were, what was it?
That's not funny. Sorry. It's like a...
But it is coming in hot.
Yeah, it's for sure.
Like something that I wasn't expecting them to write about.
Yeah.
And at such a young age, they then talked about how that trauma stayed with them until they were, I think they said, in their 30s was when
They started to get dental work done to like, fix that trauma.
Right.
Also, I will say I went down like a whole rabbit hole because this is okay. So here is one thing that I did not expect to happen with this podcast, because I thought like, okay, we're going to do this podcast about banned books, right? And I thought like Anne Frank, like Catcher in the Rye, like Lord of the Flies, like all of these old ass fucking books everyone's read. And it was like such a treat to read a book that was written in the last couple of years by someone who's young, who like knows social media. So there's so much information. Like I watched interviews that they did. I read articles that they wrote. I'm looking at one right now that they wrote for Refinery 29. Beautifully written.
Let's hear.
So one of the things that I love about this particular article that George M. Johnson wrote for Refinery 29, it was released February 23rd of this year, so 2023. And it just like brings it all together. This book is still so relevant. Kind of long, but I'm going to read it. It says, what does it really mean to ban a book? It's almost always done under the guise of protecting some sort of presupposed notion of children's innocence or purity, framing the book in question as a moral offense or a direct threat to children. On January 12th, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, boo,
Fuck that guy.
rejected a proposed AP Black History course, citing that the course would indoctrinate children with a political agenda. But even more specifically, he mentioned that the course would deal with queer theory and studies, further bolstering his decision to back it. Listen to what's being said here. The people who hold the power in this country, our lawmakers, do not want our young people to learn their history. And yes, it's their history. Let's also be clear. You cannot begin to have the conversation about Black history without talking about the impact of Black queer people. You can label these guidelines as pro-Christian or come up with falsified justifications as to why courses like these aren't necessary, but we can see right through that facade. And this is really where he like nails the head. Nails the head of this.
It's the nail on the head.
Hits the nail.
He nails that head.
He ends this chapter with saying, these are blatantly misogynistic, anti-women, anti-Black, anti-LGBT policies that are making their way into our educational system. This should terrify us all. In this one chapter, they capture something that I've been feeling, fearing, experiencing for the last year. And since this has been released, Florida has also taken out Psychology 101. I believe it was Psychology 101. They've put in Purdue U, I think.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And we've seen a couple clips of that, and it's complete propaganda. It's funny how they talk so much about not grooming children, but when you watch these videos, if you go look them up, it's live propaganda that they're just feeding children.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It is Purdue U. So
it hurts me for them. And I lived, unfortunately, in Florida for about 4 years. I went to welding school there. So
any chance to bring up welding? I'm kidding.
So
I don't think it's Purdue. I'm sorry. Let me look it up.
As you can see, she's a welder hater. But she loves me anyway. Yeah, so I lived there for 4 years, and I met a lot of wonderful people in Florida, some of whom I still...
Prager
University.
Prager University. Sorry to Purdue University. I know that is a real university.
No shade at Purdue.
My apologies to you.
Yeah, but there's a lot of good people in Florida, and there's unfortunately a lot of intensely confused people in Florida. I think when you look at the influences that Florida has, as far as political influences and just the information that they're giving, and when you look at, what's the university called again?
Prager University.
When you look at the videos from Prager University, which and I guess anybody can just call themselves a university.
Well, they're technically Prager U, just the U,
Yeah, good.
just the U,
Like
not university. It's
like
trash.
Prager uncomfortable, like
It's trash. It like one of the videos was like,
unsatisfying,
no, one of the videos was like, wasn't it?
unsmart.
One of the videos was like, girls, just remember, you have a beautiful smile. Like, do your makeup, but don't be too scandalous. It's crazy.
Oh no! One of the videos that I saw was of their cartoons similar to South Park.
Okay.
Like
I
a
didn't see this
situation.
one.
Yeah, and so you've got a black man talking to two cartoon white kids.
Okay. I don't
And
like where this is going.
right, and he's talking to them, and he's like, and they're all, we feel really bad for what happened, because he's speaking in the tense of like he's living in the slave age, talking to
God.
them about.
I already don't like where this is going.
Right. Well, he's talking to them about what the times that he's living in, and they're like, we feel really bad about what you're experiencing, and he's like, you don't have to feel bad. You're not the ones that did it, so you just keep on going through your life and don't worry about a thing. As long as you live your life the best that you can, don't even give this a second thought. I'm not saying that we as white people have to be actively. I'm not taking on slavery as something that I did myself. But I'm not threatened when people want to teach the actual face of slavery that happened, because that's not what we were taught. We're not taught that there's actually slave trades where people were eating people. People ate people.
People were kept in dungeons.
People were kept in
People
dungeons.
were bred.
There was breeding plantations. They come out and they're like, oh, well, there's some white people that have the fucking audacity to be like, well, look, if you were to go buy a gun, would you treat your gun badly? And I'm like, one, please don't compare people to inanimate objects. Please don't compare people to inanimate objects, you asshole. And second of all, in no way, shape, or form did slavery benefit the slaves or the people that came after them. The people right now are not benefiting from slavery. Nobody benefited from slavery except for the white motherfuckers that still own the land, own the companies that they got off the backs of the labor. So, no, I don't feel like I put anybody in chains, but I do know that the world that we live in right now is not healed from the damages that my ancestors did.
Right.
And I know that I can do something to make that better. And that's it. And I know that I'm still learning. That's all that needs to be asked of us. Let's try to leave it better than we found it.
Right.
It's bullshit.
It's bullshit to try to erase or whitewash, for lack of a better word.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
To whitewash history. Especially in Florida.
Yeah, like I said, those people get a very small amount of accurate information, and then they take it as truth.
Also, can we stop asking people where they're from?
Yeah, for the love of God, please stop it. Let's also take touching people's hair without their permission, or please just don't ask to touch their hair. Like, let's just take those things off the table. Talk to people like they're humans, and leave it there. Like, treat them the way you would want to be treated. Jesus lovers. Do you know, I don't know the validity of it, but I heard that there's some part of the Christian movement that is saying that Jesus was too woke and that they prefer like a Donald Trump mentality over that.
I literally... Okay, guys, don't come for me because of who I follow on my Instagram or who follows me. It's like I have like 500 people. It's like me following like 500. It's like people I either went to school with, or like this particular case is like a wife of someone that I know. I told Gina about this already. But they posted a video of Donald Trump getting out of his limo or some shit like that, and they put the word courage over it. And I was like, oh no, are we still backing him?
They're still sending him money right now.
I know.
They're still sending him money right now.
Isn't that fucking crazy?
He's I don't know his stats these days. I don't know if he's billionaire, millionaire, whichever fucking one.
I don't think he was ever a billionaire.
I don't give a shit. The point is, like, I don't give a shit what he was. He's no better to me than a piece of toilet paper to wipe my ass with, and he doesn't relate to your struggle. I don't care who you are. He doesn't relate to your struggle. He's not your fucking hero.
Like, I love you. I love you for being so passionately like mad at like what he's doing to his supporters. I'm more looking at him like a car crash that you can't take your eyes off, and you're like, wow, people are still doing this. Like, I literally talked to someone about this today, and I was like, because they were like, there's no good candidates. And I'm like, yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Fair. Biden's been president for 3 years now. And are we stoked about another 4 years? No, we're not stoked. But also, he's not a criminal.
There's that.
Like, the bar is so low that he's not a criminal. And that's good enough for me.
Right. Well, I'm not going to say in any way, shape, or form majority, but there's a percentage of people out there that went and looked at a reality star and they were like, you know what I'd love to do? Make that guy my fucking president.
Ronald Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Like they fucking love it, dude.
But it's not the first time.
They fucking love it, dude. I don't get it. Why don't you want somebody who's actually qualified to run a country? Why don't you want that? A smart, intelligent, well-verbalized person. Why don't you want that?
Respectfully to you, the older I get, the more I realize there are very few people that are qualified to do their jobs. And most of them are men.
Oh, they're like all men.
They're like,
no, I'm just kidding.
No, there's some women out there that are not, but you know what I mean? I'm just saying, like, it's just having the audacity and the self-worth to apply for the jobs. Cause like truly there are people out there that are qualified for jobs that are not even applying for them. And some dude is out there going like, I could fucking do that. I could run a whole fucking sector of something. I could be governor. Oh, was the next step to be president? Fuck yeah.
He's like, I got my GED. I could do that. No, it's true. When I go to apply for jobs a long time ago, and I think you and I even talked about it.
Yeah, we talked about it in the first episode too.
Right. Like apply like you're a white man.
Yeah.
Because
have the nerve.
Like you just might get it.
For reals. But back to the book.
But back to the book, though. Yeah, the rest of the book, they really go into a lot of the takeaway that I got was the family structure. They also had an older brother who he identifies as gay. So their father was kind of well-versed in having a child that was a little different. I think that directly tumbled down into them being more accepted by their father than I think the average queer child would be. And they talk a lot about their relationship with their nanny. I think their
maternal grandmother. They call her nanny.
And
I really love that. I really, really love that because I feel like a lot of people don't have like nuclear families.
Well, they talked about the fact that they needed school credits. So their nanny went and created a whole organization so that they could get the school credits. And if that's not support, I don't know what support is. Yeah. Their nanny sounded like a hero. And
you had a similar experience, I think, growing up. Like you were super close to your maternal grandma.
Yes. Yeah. We called her Frama. She's a little different of an experience to their nanny, but
I got to meet her once.
She passed away last year. And I love her very much and I miss her. I was named after her actually. She was a big character and I definitely got my sense of humor from her. But because my mom did drugs, I ended up at my grandparents' house a lot. And my mom's a beautiful woman that I'm completely proud of. She's been sober since I was 12. And she went back to college, got her degree. She's fluent in sign language. She's a powerhouse of a human. So
she really is.
I don't want everybody to rest on the fact that her coping mechanism for abuse was addiction because she's turned her life around, and I'm very proud of her. But because of that experience, I had some experience as well as a direct reflection, and I ended up with my grandma. And I think that there's something to be said about being raised by an older generation, and I think that you can relate to that as well in your own way. Like,
Yeah.
your mother is not a grandmother, but she did have you at a very...
So my mom had me when she was 45 years old, which I know that sounds crazy, but the older I get, the more I realize how old that actually was.
I'm all, oh my gosh.
Because when I was like in my 20s, I was like, yeah, no, she had me at 45, like big fucking deal.
Yeah.
But now I'm 35 and I'm like, fuck, 10 years from now, having a kid, nah,
No.
it's not for me.
I'm 39 right now, and I don't want to chase a little being. I mean,
No.
I love children in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
And there might have been a time where that was in a different dimension that might have been our lives. But in this life, we are happily childless.
We have 2 pit bulls.
We do have our babies.
They are so cute.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, it's Paramore and Bellatrix. They are the best. But yeah, I think they were so blessed to have that community. They were so close with their cousins, which I also kind of relate to. I think it's even their cousins that taught them how to swim by just throwing them in the pool. I remember that story very specifically in the book because I was like, that's pretty cutthroat, but
Yeah.
they did it out of love.
Literally sink or swim.
Yeah, they were just little boys, and they were like, our little cousins got to learn how to swim, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say enough. Without getting into like the specifics of every single story about the book, I can't say enough good things about this book. I highly recommend it to anyone. I think it's a really good book that people can read alongside with their kids if they are worried about the content. Again, this is advised for 14 and up, so we're looking at junior high and up, and that is truly the age that people are trying to figure out who they are. And especially if you have kids that are expressing different gender identities or looking, you can tell that they're like starting to explore the world around them. I think it's a really good read, and read it alongside them. Talk to them about this. It talks a lot about masculinity. Again, I know I've already kind of touched on that, but George M. Johnson is quoted saying, masking was a coping mechanism for Black queer boys. We bury the things that have happened to us, hoping that they don't present themselves later in our adult lives. Some of us never realize that subconsciously these buried bones are what dictate our every navigation and interaction throughout life. Oddly enough, many of us connect with each other through trauma and pain. Broken people finding other broken people in the hopes of fixing one another. And just beautiful, because I've said it before and I'll say it again. Sometimes my feelings of isolation, sometimes my most lowest lows and my darkest feelings are actually what makes me feel connected to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Because that feeling, if you've gone through depression, anxiety, trigger warning, if you've ever thought about not being on the, like in this world. Yeah. If you've ever thought about that, you're with a large majority of people. It is what ties you in with everyone else around you. We are all just doing the best that we can. We're all trekking along. We've all got our traumas. And I love the way that they gave words to those feelings, because that's what books are about. That's why I fell in love with reading when I was a kid, is because when I didn't have the words, someone else did.
Mm-hmm.
And they do such a beautiful job for their community, because LGBTQ plus kids, adults, the entire community right now, we're seeing reversals of constitutional rights that we've had for years now being reversed. Unfortunately, as much as we joke about Ron DeSantis and Trump, it doesn't seem like it's getting much better anytime soon. So things like this, books like this being available so that we see representation all around us, so that we feel seen, so that we feel heard, so that we feel understood, are so important. We've talked about this before, but we talked about school districts in Southern California that are moving away from protections for LGBTQ plus students, and I know we brought it up in the last episode, but after everything happened in June of this year with LAUSD, there were protests outside of the school board meetings protesting June being acknowledged as Pride Month.
Mm.
So there was a video from Jackie Goldberg. She is the board president for LAUSD, and she's addressing an open board meeting about the protests that are happening. And I'm going to play this clip because I watched it. I mean, it's a much longer clip than this, but I watched it time and time again, and I teared up because she's talking about the impact that the protests have on not only the students, but also the staff.
Mm.
So
I am very tired of having young people and adults in the LGBT community hear 3 days of yelling and screaming about this. What do you think that did to them? What do you think that did to every gay teacher, every gay custodian, every gay worker in this city, every gay kid? What do you think that did to them? It made them afraid. It made them afraid. How dare you make them afraid because you are?
Yeah, so being in the LGBTQ plus community has only recently, I think, in the past, I would say 10-ish years, felt somewhat okay for me. And I started dating women when I was 28, so it's been a good 10 years for me, I guess. But before that, I was an advocate. And so I really read up on, the fight to get equality in marriage. Just really for us not to be unalived whenever people felt like it.
yeah.
Has been the biggest topic, I think, of my life, if you're going to go by just my sexuality and my beingness. And we're not there. And though I live in California, I walk down the street with my girlfriend. Adri and I hold hands. I don't feel like anything's going to come up and hurt us, but it's not off the table for me, is the sad part. And that's where a lot of heterosexual couples, because Adri and I have both also been in heterosexual relationships, and it's a feeling that I did not experience in a heterosexual couple. I knew that walking down the street, there was no reason why I would be in any danger for just the person's hand that I was holding. So when we're talking about this book and removing it from schools, it's taking one step back away from making it okay for us to be ourselves. It's a step back from making it normal for me to hold my girlfriend's hand. Because this is their story that they talk about from their own perspective. And if anything, it's educational. Because I'll tell you some things that I learned through this book that I hadn't thought of myself, just being a white person, is they talked about the stats on the homosexual black community and how they're 50% more likely to contract HIV. I wasn't taught that in health class.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee you that if I was taught that in health class, and maybe my peers who didn't know that they were trans or didn't know that they were queer, didn't know that they identified as gay, had that information when they were going through health class when we were in our developing years, it would definitely influence our decisions moving forward. And I hadn't thought about that because that isn't a topic that I have to deal with. And so you don't have books like this, you don't bring awareness to stuff like that because they're not teaching it in schools.
It's exactly what they said. If you're denying their actual stories, you're denying their history.
Right. Now, you're somebody who we've talked about earlier. You're kind of jumping into this whole pool of dealing with your own sexual abuse. And you talked about how important that was.
Yeah.
And that even gave you a vocabulary that you hadn't had before. Mm-hmm. So let's say that there's a 15-year-old young queer person and they have yet to be sexually abused. They read this story. They then identify, they have the vocabulary because we can't guarantee that parents are going to do their jobs. And I really wish that people would drop this narrative that that's absolutely happening. The other day I had a conversation with a gentleman and he was trying to work out his thoughts and feelings about abortion.
Oh, you didn't tell me about this.
No. He basically told me that he wouldn't talk about it with his dad because his dad was very pro-life, right?
Pro-forced birth?
Pro-forced birth, which dudes usually are because they don't have to deal with it. He was kind of going back and forth. He was saying, look, if there was a situation where my daughter or my wife was assaulted, I would absolutely not want to make anybody have a child from that situation. But I feel like if you're irresponsible, you should have to deal with those consequences. So my response to him was, well, I'm going to raise my hand and let you know that I'm the product of those consequences. And if given the choice, I would have chose not to be born. And I don't mean that in a depressing way at all. But you're telling mothers and sometimes fathers, but usually mothers, that they have to deal with these, quote, consequences of even just, let's say they're adults, and they had fun and they ended up getting pregnant. So they have to deal with the, quote, consequences of having a child that they never wanted. How do you think that child's going to be treated?
So in Ohio, an 11-year-old rape victim was forced to give birth. They are 11.
And as tragic as that might be, I don't want to have to go to extremes to justify what I can do with my body. The fact of the matter is, it's bodily autonomy. Most abortions, they want to go to extremes and be like, oh, what if somebody wants to get rid of this baby month 8? That never happens. And when I say never, I mean less than 1%.
Less than.
Like, never happens. So quit giving me these scenarios.
I'm so exhausted. It's not even just about abortion. It's about reproductive rights. It's about the right to do what you want to do. I mean, people warned us that it was going to start with abortion and it was not going to end there. And people are like, no, that's all we want to do. We want to stop the murdering of babies. And I'm so fucking tired. She's the host for the Young Turks, and she did a whole rant where she's like, I'm so fucking tired of you quoting the Bible at me. It was a couple years ago. And honestly, I'm just so fucking tired about talking about how the innocent babies are being hurt, because really the books aren't what's fucking hurting them. You want to replace school counselors in Texas with ordained ministers or chaplains or whatever the fuck you want to do. You want to change libraries in Arizona into detention centers. Like,
It's Texas, I believe.
It's Texas again? Okay, great.
Yeah, it's always just
Texas.
assume. It's Texas or Florida.
Texas or Florida.
Usual subjects.
It's not about the kids. They use the kids as something to hide behind, but then when actual shit comes up and kids are abused, they want to turn a blind eye. Or there's an 11-year-old in Ohio that gets raped and has to have their rapist baby, and they've got nothing to fucking say. I'm so fucking tired of it. I'm so fucking tired of the fact that I've been asking since I was 20 years old to tie my tubes, and there's not been a doctor who wants to do it for me.
Or they want to, ask your husband.
Right.
Quote, husband.
I can't tell you how many times in my life I've heard someone say, you're going to change your mind. Well, guess what? I'm 35 and I've never fucking been happier not to have a kid. That's just the reality. How about we believe women when they know what they want to do with their fucking bodies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about
if someone is mentally stable enough to sign up for the military at 18 years old and go die for their country, that same 18-year-olds can get contraception.
Yeah.
How about that?
Preach on that one. How about stop stop making it okay for us to go to jail, go in the military, things like that. But then as soon as we want to do something with our own bodies that doesn't hurt anybody else, anyone else, then you want to put regulations on that. I don't go around telling you that you can't cut off one of your nuts, dude. Like, get out of here. Get the old wrinkly peanut and take it off for all I give a shit. Nobody wants your spawn anyway. Don't tell me what to do with my uterus. Don't tell me what to do with a clump of cells that's growing in my uterus. And I don't care what the scenario is. It doesn't have to be rape. It just gets to be my decision. That's it. That's it. That's all. And if you want to go ahead and hide behind taking this book out, saying that it's too sexual for kids to understand, kids are getting erections. They need vocabulary. He didn't talk about it in any way, shape, or form that was outside of medical. He talked about it from a firsthand experience, and if I had heard that at his age, it would have been really healing for me.
It was healing for me in my 30s.
Right. So here's one of the quotes from the book that I love the most. I'll read it to you right now. It says, "There is truly something to be said about the fact that you sometimes can't see yourself if you can't see other people like you existing. It's important for us to see ourselves in other people. It's important for our development. You're developing. And I understand that that scares some people. It scares some parents. They don't want their kids to go in a direction that freaks them out. It's unfamiliar.
Totally. I get that. But one of the things I wanted to talk about that was really important for me to say was I wanted to bring up the Trevor Project.
100%.
If you don't know, the Trevor Project is an amazing organization that provides suicide prevention, and they've done a ton of studies, and they specifically address LGBTQ youth, right? Mm-hmm. So in this last study that they did, that I think was concluded, if I'm not mistaken, February of this year, but is the most accurate statistics as of this year, as of 2023, 11% of white youths have attempted suicide in the past year, compared to 22% of Native American Indigenous youths, 16% of Black youths, 18% of Middle Eastern, 15% Latin American, 10% Asian American or Pacific Islander. When we incorporate LGBTQ youths into that, 67% of LGBTQ plus youths have reported expressing high symptoms of anxiety or depression. So teens that are not getting seen, they're not just sad, they're suicidal. Mm-hmm. They're at risk of taking their own lives. The statistics matter because when we have the conversation about why books like this are important and why visibility and seeing yourself in the media and seeing yourself represented are important, it's not just a feel-good thing. It's statistically proven that people who don't see themselves start to have more anxiety, more depression, more attempted suicides. And we're seeing it more and more. We know now that by age 10 to 12, most girls have lost most of their self-esteem because of social media. We're living in different times where kids are so exposed to everything. Think about when we were 10 or 12 in the early 2000s, 90s, late 90s ish. We didn't have cell phones. I was comparing myself to other people, but it wasn't by me doom scrolling in bed. It was by me seeing what the coolest people were wearing or watching MTV. But that's not the case anymore. Kids have phones so young. They're seeing things around them. It's important for them to have the verbiage to speak about what they're feeling, because we know that at this point, like, those developmental ages are so important for us to be able to make them feel seen, understood, heard, and help them have successful lives moving forward. Because it can, even for us at our age, the world can feel crippling. Imagine if you don't have context for what it could be like in the future.
One subject that Adrienne and I talk about a lot is anxiety. I get anxiety from time to time. She gets anxiety really frequently. And we're grown-ass adults. There's still times when I'm looking in her eyes and there's so much fear and pain. And I'm not saying there's nothing I can do about that, but she's an adult who's trying to self-regulate. I'm her partner who's doing everything I can to show her compassion and to help her in any way, shape, or form. And there's still times where I feel like we're not hitting the mark. So take that down. Try to remember what it's like to be in your teen years. Try to remember what it's like to be in your early 20s or just your 20s, because those are intense times.
Yeah.
Magnify those feelings by a million, and then throw social media and the news saying that there's impending doom every single day.
According to the Trevor Project, nearly 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus youth say that their mental health was poor most of the time or always due to anti-LGBTQ plus policies and legislation.
Well, how scary. How
They're
scary.
paying attention.
Yeah. Like, how scary to show up to school or, you know, wherever you're going, and to have the people that you're supposed to look up to or your peers telling you that just being who you are is wrong, and you're not even fully aware of who you are.
Right.
How depressing. Like, if there's anything that makes you feel more disconnected from this life, it's that.
Right. Among students who were surveyed from the Trevor Project, they did a poll of who was experiencing anxiety and depression symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 47% cisgender men.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 65% cisgender women. 68% transgender women. 76% transgender men.
Mm-hmm.
74% non-binary or queer. And 74% questioning. Across the board, except for cisgender men, we're above 50%.
Those are big numbers.
These are the most accurate numbers from 2023. And this is amongst, I forgot what age group the Trevor Project surveys. Let me check if I can see. Between ages 13 to 24. Okay, so those are the most accurate numbers between the ages of 13 to 24 in the year 2023. All of us are feeling anxiety, depression, some sort of like freak out about what's happening in the world. But amongst LGBTQ plus, amongst minorities, the global majority, the numbers are higher. And we talked about it at the very beginning of the episode, but that is the majority of the books that are being banned. Mm-hmm. 41% of the books that are being banned have to do with LGBTQ plus characters, topics, addressing people of the global majority. So what we're trying to do is just bring them to light. Books like this need to exist. We're so thankful that George M. Johnson wrote this book. We're so thankful that George M. Johnson wrote up a follow-up book. We haven't gotten to read it, but...
I mean, not only do they need to exist, they need to be accessible. Mm-hmm. They need to be easily accessible. Mm-hmm. If I had a child who was of the years 14 age and up, I would read this with my child, because I don't know who my child is going to end up being in this world, and I'm not here to control that. But I am here to take that journey with them and discover it. And even if they're not somebody who identifies as queer or gets sexually assaulted or is a black man or is born and raised they were raised in New Jersey, right?
I think so. They were raised in New Jersey and they later went to Virginia.
Okay. So, which I also went to Virginia, beautiful state. Anyway, even if I don't directly relate to all of the characteristics of this character, it only adds to wisdom that gets dropped into my psyche, knowing that there are people out there that have differences in experience than I have every single day. And it makes you a better person. It makes you a more empathetic person. It makes you a more well-rounded person. And it's not going to make them queer. It's not going to make them feel bad about who they are. It's going to make them complex thinkers. And I think that's what parents are scared of.
I think that's what the government's scared of.
Well, obviously. If there's anything that the world is teaching us, it's that. So, and I know that I've taken some shots fired at Trump supporters and things like that on this episode. But let me let you know right now, at the base of that, whether you support Trump or not, I support you over the government.
Yeah.
Like, I support you over our government. And at some point, we are going to all come to the same conclusion. And that's when they're in trouble, because that's when we make change happen. And the rest of this bullshit is resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So taking this book out is resistance. It's making you afraid of me, me afraid of you, because we don't have that knowledge, and ignorance is bliss, right? They throw books like this in here. We start getting critical thinking involved. We start getting on the same page. They're in trouble. Stop listening to the news. They're in trouble. Stop getting pissed off every day. They're in trouble. Don't think that taking books like this out of schools has a singular purpose. There's so much more to it than just, oh, there's sexual content in here. They don't want us to be relating to each other. Keep that in mind. I learned valuable life lessons from this book. It's one of my favorite books. George Johnson is an amazing person. It would be a dream of mine to meet him one day. They're an amazing writer. They're, I think, going to be remembered as one of the greatest writers of our time. They're super bright. They've told a ballsy, honest story here. And they even talk about their life in college and assimilating to a college lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Having, I think they said half of the gentlemen in the fraternity were closeted homosexuals, which is such a funny concept for me. But even throwing that out there was probably in some way, shape, or form bravery, because
I literally hate to use the word brave. It's my least, it feels so cliche. When people are
they're so brave.
They're so brave for showing their stretch marks. I think we're past that as a culture.
Mm-hmm.
But this was truly a profound book. This was honest. This was vulnerable. This was transparent and authentic to who they are. And it was enlightening. I hope that whoever reads it takes something away, because I think I've taken quite a few nuggets from it that I am very thankful for the author for taking the time, having the vulnerability, having the courage to put these things down into writing, to give words to feelings that I didn't know I had. They knew that this book was going to be controversial when they wrote it. They acknowledged it. And I don't think that there's any discussion about why.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've kind of covered it. But I really do think that this is a fantastic read. Anyone who is interested should read it. Outside of the LGBTQ plus community or within it, I think there's something there for everyone.
There's so many things there.
It's a really honest look at the memoir of their life. But more than that, it is a conversation starter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, like I said, I learned so much from this book. And if this podcast ever reaches George's ears.
Oh, the idea is so cool.
Right. And
I'm a big fan.
I'm a huge fan.
I love your work.
Yeah. I think you're adorable. I looked pictures up of you online.
Oh my God, they're so cute.
You're the handsomest.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've quickly become one of my heroes. You're a leader. And thank you so much for writing this book. Anybody who reads this book is they're going to learn today. So I think we'll take that as the wrap-up signal. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who came back.
There's one more thing I want to say.
Oh, okay. Here we are.
Here we are. So I want to read one thing that they wrote for NPR. I've been fighting for LGBTQ rights for as long as I can remember, because in turn, I'm fighting for myself and fighting for people like me. This is just an extension of the advocacy work that I do. Writing is a form of activism.
I love that.
I know.
Well, they say artists are the truth tellers of a generation, right?
Yeah, I really expected when we started when we started the concept of this podcast to read kind of like old books, and there was something really, I feel like I'm going to cry again.
It's okay.
With everything that's happening in the world, with everything that's happening in Florida, in California, in Virginia, in Ohio, like literally Texas, all over the United States, I think a book like this is so important. It's only 3 years old, and I know that this is going to be a profound book for years and years and years to come.
I agree. And to our audience out there, I know we talk a lot about a lot of heavy subjects. I want to let you know right now that remember the world that we've lived in, humanity, we're still very young, and the world needs to make some changes. So when it starts to feel really intense, just remember that when you're going through growing pains, it feels really intense, but you always come out better on the other side. And if things start to get overwhelming, please come listen to our podcast or come check us out on Patreon. Interact with us. We'd love to hear from you. I love you guys.
We love you guys. Bye.
Bye.
And that brings us to the end of another episode. If you found this discussion insightful and thought-provoking, don't forget to show your support. You can find all the links and references mentioned in today's episode in the description down below. Whether you're looking for articles, books, or additional resources to explore, we've got you covered.
And if you haven't already, make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to us. It's the best way to stay connected and engaged. It gets our books out there into the places where maybe they might not be reachable because they are banned.
And if you're really passionate about what we're doing and you want to take your support to the next level, please consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
You'll be gaining access to exclusive bonus content, which I don't post to the regular platforms. And you'll even have the opportunity to vote for the next book that we read and suggestions for topics and future episodes. Thanks again for tuning into the Band Together podcast. You can follow us on TikTok. Your feedback and involvement make this podcast possible. So keep reading between the lines.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.